Alright everybody, hi from the hustling, bustling, right smack dab in downtown Portland. I am trying to get to, wait a minute. I'm trying to get to the wrong direction. I'm going east when I should have been going west. Well, what have you. I'm trying to get to 4th Avenue between Alder and Washington in downtown Portland, because this is a bizarre freaking case on a new episode of Historic Murders of Portland. Alright, so across the street here, there's of course construction going on, but somewhere, this is Alder behind me, and this is Washington over here. Somewhere in the middle, there was the Circle Theater. And reportedly, on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1927, a man named Frederick Johnson was grabbed and drugged behind the theater, it seems, in this vicinity where he was murdered. But that's just the general outline of the case, because what actually happened is really kind of bizarre, and even to this point I don't really fully understand it. So then March 29th, it's been a little over a year since this mysterious case has happened. And even when I read about it in the newspapers, it seemed like it was more a presumption that this happened, but it didn't seem like anybody really knew whether it had happened here or not. Anyway, March 29th, 1928, so almost 13 and a half months later, the Los Angeles authorities get a letter from a woman named Henrietta Nelson claiming that she and a gentleman named George Howard had essentially tracked this Frederick Johnson, whom they'd known in Seattle, and apparently Howard had been threatening towards Johnson while they were up in the Washington area, and that was the primary reason that Frederick Johnson fled from Seattle to the Portland area. This is all through Henrietta Nelson's letter that she wrote. She just woke up one morning and decided to admit to all this. So she and Nelson and Howard, I'm sorry, I'm mixing all these names up. Johnson, Nelson, Howard. Nelson and Howard tried to track Frederick Johnson to Portland, and they actually tracked him to Oregon City, is what they said. And when they found out where he was staying in Oregon City, Henrietta Nelson managed to convince him to come meet her, specifically in front of the Circle Theater, which used to be right over here. And he agreed to meet her. I don't know if they were old friends, maybe they were lovers. I really don't know what their backstory is together. It seems kind of interesting that this guy fled to Portland out of fear of this guy that Nelson has connections to, that he would so willingly just go and meet her, but he agreed to meet with her, and they met. Again, the Circle Theater was kind of in the middle of this block, so it would have been, where these businesses are open during construction signings, it probably would have been roughly right there. Frederick Johnson comes and meets up with Henrietta Nelson. What an interesting area to talk about a murder that happened. So, literally kind of right where all the scaffolding is, Johnson meets up with Nelson. Howard shows up, and they're kind of standing around shooting the breeze, and it seems like Howard's probably waiting for the right moment. He eventually grabs Johnson, stuffs a gag in his mouth, drags him into an alley behind the theater that would have been here, at least according to their story, and takes him back there and starts beating him. And then by Henrietta Nelson's own admission, she comes back there and she stabs him. I believe that's what she said she did. And they start looting his pockets because they thought this guy had a lot of money on him. It was a, attack and grab, cash and run. And reportedly, Howard finished things off by shooting Johnson right in the head. And with the deed done, they realized, they have this body to take care of, so they drug the body to a car they had, put it in the car, and then drove to the east side of the river, where they say they ditched it in a lumber mill, after hours or something like that. So that's the story, is they lured this Frederick Johnson guy to the vicinity of the Circle Hotel. It would have been right here, this area I just walked through, where they brutally murdered him just to see what he had on him. And then they fled. And that's the story. The problem is, the body was never found. And the whole story that Henrietta Nelson tried to tell, she confessed to this, but she gave local authorities nothing to go on. She didn't give them the name of the sawmill that they supposedly left him, so they didn't know where to search. They searched general sawmills in the area, but came up empty. And when the Circle Theater was here on this block, there was no alleyway. There was no alleyway anywhere near there. I don't know if there really ever have been, even way back in the day, and this was 1927. I don't know if there ever really been alleyways in Portland. Buildings have always just been kind of butt up against each other. So their whole story kind of fell apart. What is this alleyway next to the Circle? They obviously had to have some knowledge of the city of Portland and how it was structured, because they knew that there was a Circle Theater here. But beyond that, it seems like they didn't really know where to go with their story. And on top of that, they attack this guy in front of a movie theater in public. It would be right now, if I was just shooting the breeze with someone right now, and I suddenly grabbed him and drug him into some area between these buildings and just beat them and murdered them and robbed them. And then after that, I have to take that body that it's all bloody and stuff and pull it out and reveal it as you try to drag it to your car wherever that was parked. They do all this stuff and nobody saw him. No witness reports, nobody saw anything. How could you pull off something like that in public and not get seen by at least somebody? And they couldn't trace a Frederick Johnson to staying in Oregon City, because he was apparently renting a place out there, where there's a hotel room or whatever. There was nothing to verify this story. Nobody knows to this day if this Frederick Johnson ever existed. So it's just kind of wild and crazy, because you think, why would somebody openly come out and admit to being part of a murder that didn't happen? Or if it did, it sure as hell didn't happen in Portland, or at least the part of Portland they said it was. There's no evidence that this crime ever took place. And you think, how? Why would somebody admit to a crime they didn't commit? It sounds crazy, of course, unless someone is just, is out to just have themselves sabotaged. But yeah, there was nothing that happened here. And so you'd like to think, you like to just dismiss it. Case closed. This is just a crazy person. Well, before you completely dismiss their whole story, right around the same time, 1927, so Valentine's Day 1927 is supposedly when this case happens. Well, I found a random article from September 9th, 1926. So we're talking, a couple months before this murder happened. While we're on the subject of why would someone admit to a crime they never committed, there was a guy living in Cleveland named George Varlissa, who was reportedly homeless, living on the streets. Locals thought he was kind of crazy, so there you go. And he admitted he'd killed somebody in Portland back in 1923. He said he killed a guy named Michael Parch. And Cleveland police contacted Portland police, like, do you have a case of a Michael Parch who's dead? And Portland police reported back and said they didn't want Varlissa on any crime. The Portland law enforcement felt this Varlissa guy may have been a guy named George Vlisak, who'd been cleared of a killing by a grand jury in Portland back in November 1922. Was it this Parch guy? I don't know. Vlisak had been attacked by 3 men during an argument wherein he had to take up a butcher knife to defend himself. That's what I took away, and so maybe that's the same guy who was just losing his mind as a vagrant on the streets of Cleveland. But I mean, there you go, right around the same time, a guy openly contacting authorities to tell them to admit to a killing that he may or may have not have even been involved in. So it does happen. It happens, but it's just not that common of an occurrence. But maybe that's what happened. So, I mean, the question will always loom then, like, did a guy named Frederick Johnson get killed on Valentine's Day 1927 in the vicinity of the Circle Theater that used to stand in the middle of this block right here? Probably not. Unless they were just lying about how the case went down or lying about an assortment of other details. But we'll never know for certain. And sometimes that's the fun of it. So that's it, guys, for this episode of Historic Murders of Portland. I hope you enjoyed it. Another what if, did it happen, did anything happen? And remember, as always, like, share, subscribe. My GoPro's running out of space, so I gotta be quick about it. Hit up my Patreon if you want to help me financially. And yep, all that said, I gotta cut myself off. Till next time, this has been Steve the Amateur Historian with another episode of maybe a historic murder of Portland.